Hey everyone, welcome back to another video from A Man Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going through the round 12 trade targets and preview, getting very close to that first buy round and the state of origin period, which is always really exciting, and plenty of news out of Teamless Tuesday and the match review committee and judiciary, so plenty of stuff to get our teeth into. But before you do that, I would really appreciate a thumbs up on the video if you do like it, and would really appreciate a subscription to the channel as well if you haven't already, as I'll put more videos out through the 2021 SuperCoach season. But let's get into the video. So we'll just do a quick wrap up of the round 12 teamless talking points. I think out of the Melbourne Storm and Broncos game, the first thing that's really important I think to note is Jahrome Hughes coming back into the number 7 role for the Storm, which is a really big inclusion for them and definitely puts them on the radar in terms of a trade target given the nice draw that the Storm have got coming up. And on the Broncos side, I guess the key changes for them is Matt Lodge and Tyson Gamble are both out with suspensions, and I think for a week. There is actually some talk that Matt Lodge may even be going to the Newcastle Knights very soon as well. That's definitely some worthwhile news to keep an eye on. For the Dragons, Cody Ramsey, he has been named at the fullback position, but it will be pending, I think, his full HIA recovery, given that he failed his HIA in the last match. So I think a few people did look to bring him in last week, given his price and the nice draw for the Dragons. So definitely some key news coming out of that for him. On the Bulldog side of things, Josh Jackson and Jack Hetherington are really big ins for them. And this definitely should factor into our thinking in terms of a Luke Thompson trade-in target and whether or not he's still going to be able to keep up his good performances with the return of these two. But we'll discuss Luke Thompson a little bit more later in the video. For the Rabbitohs, a big in for them is the return of Cam Murray. Did mention last week that I think he really has had a big impact in not being there for the Rabbitohs in the past few weeks. Putting aside that they've played two of the best teams in the comp in Melbourne and Penrith, the Cam Murray returning I think is really big news for them and also for New South Wales with State of Origin just around the corner. Siosiua Takiaho for the Roosters is named to start, which is a really big plus for anyone who's held on to him, but he has lost a goal kicking duty, so we don't know quite yet if he's going to get back to that keeper status that we're hoping for. For the Raiders, big changes for them. Jordan Rapana is back for them on the wing. Sam Williams is in at halfback due to what was a bit of a media frenzy around George Williams getting an immediate release out of the Raiders. There was talk of him being homesick and wanting to go back home to his partner. That seems like, the Raiders have just nip it in the bud and have just said, let's just end it there. And Sam Williams is now in. And that really is big news out of the Raiders. And it seems like there are some issues happening over there. For the Sharks, we've got Shaun Johnson is being named in the starting side, as well as Jesse Ramien, who's made a quicker than expected recovery. I think he had an eye injury, so he's back after a couple of weeks. Definitely someone to keep an eye on in maybe like a mid-range centre wing category if you're looking for a bit of a point of difference. Big in for the Titans here is Dave Fifita has come back from his 2-week suspension. So for anyone who's held on to him for this period of time, they must be licking their lips knowing that he's a lot less owned than a fortnight ago. Coming up against the Sharks, he's in surely for a big game. So definitely a big in for the Titans. And for the Newcastle Knights, we've got Kalen Ponga and Bradman Best both returning to the starting side, which should hopefully bode well for them, given how poor they've kind of shown to be in the past few weeks without their gun strike weapons. So hopefully this does reinvigorate their attack a little bit and hopefully boost the potential of guys like Mitch Barnett and Connor Watson, although I'm not holding out too much hope given what we've seen from the coach in terms of the minutes rotation for those two guys in the past few weeks. In terms of the key outs this round, we've got Jason Taumalolo out for a week suspension, and given that he's going to miss this week and round 13, he's definitely looking like a round 14 or round 15 trade-in target. He didn't score too well last week, given that he had that sin bin, so he's definitely someone we have to keep an eye on when he comes back, and also how his minutes are going to be when he returns from his suspension. For the Panthers, big outs for them. Dylan Edwards still is not made a full recovery, so he won't be playing in the 17 for them this week. And Kurt Capewell has also got a 1-week suspension, so he's definitely also someone to consider as a sell, given that he's going to miss next week, you'd think, with State of Origin duties as well as this week. So I think it's definitely okay to move on Kurt Capewell, given that he's going to be missing for the next fortnight as well. For the Roosters, obviously big news out of the Roosters, probably the biggest news this week. Firstly, I guess Joseph Swiley's named in the extended reserves again, with Josh Morris taking his place back in the centres. But the big news out of the judiciary for the Roosters was Victor Radley being out for 5 games now, and Angus Crichton, he's going to be missing 2 games. We will touch on Angus Crichton and whether or not that 2 games does include State of Origin, because in my own opinion, it's a bit muddled as to what the rules are. So definitely something to consider when you're looking to if you're looking to hold or sell Angus Crichton, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We already touched on George Williams, and a little bit of an update on Ryan Papenhuyzen as well. He obviously wasn't playing last week, but it seems that the news out of the Melbourne Storm camp and out of Craig Bellamy is that he's potentially not going to be back in this team until maybe round 15 or 16, which really does obviously completely rule him out of contention, you'd think, for State of Origin duties, and also in our sides in general. So a really, really big blow for anyone who did decide to hold on to Pappenhausen this whole time. He missed for a month, came back and got knocked out within his first game. Really, really hard to take, and it's just really bad luck. But yeah, it seems like he's going to be out for a while. That does spell good news though for Nico Hines, who we will get to in a little bit later in the video. But that is the Team List Tuesday highlights for this round. So very, very comfortably, the most popular trade that's done this week is Sam Walker to Matt Burton. And let's go through the pros and cons of this move and whether or not it's a good one to do. Now, in terms of selling Sam Walker, I can kind of understand the rationale behind it. He scored 11 points last week against the Broncos. We all thought that he was going to have a fantastic match. I even potentially tipped him as a decent captaincy shout. I really hope people didn't, because obviously he only would have given you 22 points. So he's shown to be having a really, really low floor, but we know obviously he's got a really big ceiling. Those tough games against Penrith and Melbourne, he really didn't score too well. Before that, he was hitting 80s, 125, 163 against the Knights in particular. That definitely stood out. So he's definitely shown to have really, really high ceiling, but a low, low floor. And I guess the case to sell Sam Walker is that he's got a really high break even. It's 125 at the moment, and he already has started to leak cash. He was priced at 599k, and he's now at 538,000 instead. And then 125 break even. The Roosters don't play in round 13. The Roosters schedule actually isn't the best. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. If we look at it here, the Raiders this week is probably going to be a decent matchup, although you can, maybe caveat with the fact that last week was supposed to be a good matchup against the Broncos and the Roosters didn't do so well. But I think that definitely was a shock to everyone within the whole league. So the Canberra Raiders this week is not a bad game. Then they've got the bye in round 13, which isn't ideal if you're really looking to go hard in that round 13 bye week. They've got the Titans in round 14, which is a good game. Then you've got round 15 and 16, which is against the Panthers, and then the Melbourne Storm. The two toughest teams that you don't want to be playing. So you can look at that kind of stretch in the next 4 or 5 weeks and, consider that pretty tough. And so I think the argument as well with the loss of Victor Radley for 5 weeks, I think if anyone was watching that game, it definitely looked like the Roosters attack was, suffering when Radley was out for those sin bin spells. He definitely plays like a bit of a, halfback in the middle, connects up both sides of the field. Definitely is a great link man for the Roosters. And so I definitely think that Sam Walker's attacking potential might suffer, and the overall Roosters as well without Victor Radley. So I think combining those toughish games coming up during that next little bye period, as well as maybe potentially the Roosters attack suffering, is definitely a good argument to sell him. In terms of holding him, I think the options at halfback are really, really thin. Nathan Cleary is obviously the standout, and no one's really looking. No one's going to question that. Apart from that, you've got guys like Jahrome Hughes, who we'll get onto in a little bit. We've got Matt Burton, who's coming up. We've got like maybe a Mitch Moses and like a Cody Nikarima potentially. So the options are okay, but they're very thin. And I think Sam Walker's probably shown enough, in that he's got that high enough ceiling. You obviously have to expect, he might have the occasional game where he goes really low. But if you've got cover in your team, you can potentially just not have to play him in those tough matchups, and then hope in these easy games that he is able to hit a really, really high ceiling. And he will be a handy number in the round 17 bye week, where the Roosters play the Bulldogs. That's a game where he could easily go ton up, and I think you'd probably want someone like Sam Walker in that game. So I think there is an argument potentially to hold, especially also with trades, being very precious now. I think a lot of people are starting to look to save trades and be very considerate of how they use them, given how many injuries and suspensions we've seen so far this season, and the likelihood of more suspensions is still going to be there. So I think preserving trades is definitely some strategy that I think I would advise as well. And so that definitely would maybe lean you in towards the holding Sam Walker camp. So that's my whole little spiel about Sam Walker, whether to sell or hold. If you do fall into the sell category, who do we bring in for him? So we'll look at Matt Burton here. This is the most popular trade in target for Sam Walker, and I think there are a lot of things going for Matt Burton, which I really, really like. He's got a decent price at 447k, so you would make about 90k doing that Sam Walker to Burton move. He scored 123 last week, and that's now going to be in his rolling average. So he's got a pretty decent break even of 22, and so his 3-round average is 66, and he's averaging over the season 63. Very, very handy, and he's got dual flexibility as well, being listed at 5'8" and halfback in SuperCoach. And this is a bit of a money situation that you can profit off doing a Sam Walker to a Matt Burton trade. Make 90k just on that trade alone. Walker's likely going to be leaking cash unless he goes absolutely massive this week. Burton is going to be going up in price, and Burton plays round 13, and he's got a very, very nice draw coming up. We look at it there. We've got the Bulldogs this week, which is a plum fixture for him. We've got the Tigers in round 13, where you'd expect him to be playing at halfback with Nathan Cleary on State of Origin duty. In round 14, he's got the Sharks, and then it's the Roosters and the Eels, and then a bye. So the Roosters and Eels, a little bit of a tougher game, but the way that Penrith are going, to be honest, I think they can easily still score 24 to 30 points against these tougher opponents. So someone like Matt Burton can still profit, but definitely you could use Matt Burton as a bit of a stepping stone or a cash grab. And I think that's the way you'd have to look at it. And that I don't think Matt Burton is probably going to be a season keeper at halfback. So I think it's a bit of a situation as to how many trades you've currently got. If you've been able to save maybe say 3 or 4 trades, you can actually, you've got some flexibility to do some of these trade in, trade out situations. I think it's a great move to do Sam Walker to Matt Burton because it gives you that extra money to work with. You've got a playing number in round 13, and what you can do is you can just ride Matt Burton's price increases and decent games up until say round 17, and you could flip him back to Sam Walker, who in these tougher games, if he's dipped back down to maybe in the 400k category, you might not have to make you might not have to spend any money, and you might actually pocket extra money going Matt Burton down to Sam Walker. So you are going to be using 2 trades to trade out Sam Walker, trade back in, and trade him back in, in like say round 17. But as I said, if you've got the trade saved, I think that could be a very, very viable strategy. I think the flip side of that is, if you've only saved 1 trade or if you haven't saved any trades at all, you really have to start being considerate, I think, of that trade situation, given that we've got so many more weeks left in the season, and the state of origin period, managing the buys, all these new suspensions that we're seeing. I think the trades are going to run out really, really quickly. So I think it's really important to be strategic in how you're going to use your trades. And so I think if you haven't been able to save trades or not have saved many at all, then I don't maybe think that the Sam Walker to Matt Burton move is the best, because I think if you are looking to trade Sam Walker, I would probably look to do it to like a season keeper who will just get into. So the next, valid trade target I think for Sam Walker is going to be Jahrome Hughes. They're definitely, I think, Jahrome Hughes and Matt Burton, the 2 trade-in targets for Sam Walker this week if you are on the sell side for Walker. What I do like about Hughes in comparison to Matt Burton is I think that Jahrome Hughes is going to be a season keeper. He's got an average of 73, a 3-round average of 86, and I think he's got a 5-round average of like 100. It's absolutely insane. And the Storm have got a fantastic draw coming up, which makes him like a great trade-in target for Sam Walker, in my opinion. They've got the Broncos this week, then they've got the Titans in the round 13 bye week, then they've got the Warriors, and then the Tigers, then they've got the Roosters round 16, and then the bye in round 17. The reason I think I'd probably prefer Jahrome Hughes if you can make the money work, because he is 714k, so you are having to spend money up to go to Jahrome Hughes. So I think he is a genuine season keeper, and I think at this point, with trades being more precious, if you can do a trade that gets you to a season keeper who you can set and forget for the rest of the season, that's a good trade, and I think I would go for it. And I think you really want to capitalize probably on this good draw for Jahrome Hughes, and so I think the Sam Walker to Jahrome Hughes would be my preference if you could make the money work, but I do understand that is quite a bit of money to fork up. It's about 180k to do that Sam Walker to Jahrome Hughes. I personally don't have the money in the bank to actually do that Sam Walker to Jahrome Hughes move, so I am still tossing up whether if I firstly even want to trade out Sam Walker or if I want to go down to a Matt Burton to make a little bit of money, because I do think that for the money purposes, I think it's a good trade to do the Walker to Burton move. But I think my preference would be to go to Jahrome Hughes, because I do think that he's going to be a season keeper. And even though he's not playing in round 17, I think he'll probably should hopefully score enough points in the next month, 4 to 5 weeks, to validate not having to have him playing as a number in round 17. Now, I will also just quickly touch on some alternatives for Sam Walker. If either one of those 2 guys, Matt Burton or Jahrome Hughes, doesn't take your fancy, I've got Mitchell Moses here as 521k, so he's very, very similarly priced to Sam Walker. I do think he's probably maybe like the 3rd best option, and I think for that reason I'm not too keen on him, because I think he's averaging 55. He's had a decent 3-round average of 64, but I think the Eels have started to maybe peter off a little bit, and we saw this last year actually, very, very similar time in the season. They had a really, really strong start, and then they started to peter out a little bit. Obviously, it's just one game against the Sea Eagles that they've lost, but hopefully the writing's not on the wall again for them, and he's still able to produce some good attacking points. But I think he's just less exciting for me as well to trade in Mitch Moses. He is obviously a bit more of a point of difference compared to say a Jahrome Hughes or a Matt Burton. But I think my preference would be to probably stick with one of those 2 instead of going for Mitch Moses, who I don't think is a season-long keeper. Albert Kelly is also a very popular trade-in target. This one I don't really understand why. Obviously, he scored 71 last week in his first game back, which is obviously really impressive. But he's not going to go up in price this week. He's probably going to do it next week. Well, he will do it next week if he gets another run into the team. But I think that's the key question. Is Albert Kelly going to get a continued run in the team? The Broncos have used 4 or 5 halves combinations this week. Obviously, Tyson Gamble's suspended, so Anthony Milford's coming back in. But, I feel like if the Broncos just lose 2 or 3 games, the axe is going to get swung on the halves, and then you might see Milford and Tyson Gamble again, and then Albert Kelly is just kind of, has run his course as a potential option. So I think, in my opinion, there's definitely a lot of risk going for like an Albert Kelly. He is one of the more heavily traded in people for Sam Walker as well. But I would not be advising it. I think, I don't think the Broncos versus the Storm this week. That's like one of the toughest games that you can get. I don't expect him to be scoring 71 again. If he does, I'll put my hand up and say I was wrong. But, I'd bet that he's probably going to go sub 50, for example. And I don't think he's going to be a great replacement for Walker. I would prefer to hold Walker versus going to Albert Kelly, given that Walker's versing the Raiders, and I'd much prefer that matchup. One other person I have mentioned is Cody Nikorima. Cody Nikorima doesn't play in round 13, so I think it's a bit of a situation where, say, if you are happy with your current setup in terms of your round 13 playing numbers, or if you're a completely head-to-head player and you're not as focused on the bye period, I think Cody Nikorima is a nice pod. He's kind of he's a step below Jahrome Hughes in terms of the price bracket. He's 619k, so you will still have to spend maybe like 90k from Sam Walker to Cody Nikorima. But I really, really like his He's got a really high ceiling. He's had like 3 or 4 games already so far this season where he's gone 100 plus. He's got that goal kicking duty, and we know that the Warriors can pile on a lot of points. And you could even argue with the addition of now Reece Walsh to their team, they've got an added attacking element which hopefully produces more points, and i.e. produces more goal kick points for Cody Nikorima. And averaging 71 through the season is probably going a little bit under the radar in my opinion. He's got a high break even of 94. So I understand, you don't have to bring him in this week if you're trying to maximize the kind of money. And he might come down in price, but I will also note that Sam Walker's break even is 125. So he's more than likely going to lose cash as well. So I really like the Sam Walker to Cody Nikorima move if you're more focused on head-to-head and maybe not as concerned about having your buy numbers for round 13 if your team's already well set up. I do like the Cody Nikorima move for Sam Walker. So I guess the next key question for this round is Angus Crichton. We've just found out from the judiciary last night that he is going to be out for 2 games through suspension, and he's going to be ruled out for Origin 1. There is definitely a strong argument, I think, to sell, given that his value is 605k. And I think a lot of people would probably be struggling in their second row forward. Some people might not have, they might have got rid of like a Dave Fafita. So they might currently have like maybe a Ryan Madison, a Tohu Harris, but then they might still have like a Josh Curran. I know a few people brought in like a Victor Radley. So I think a lot of people are going to be potentially running thin at second row forward. And so I can see the argument to sell him at that point if you're looking to then, make up some more numbers in that position. What I will note about Angus Crichton is that he's basically a season keeper in my eyes in second row forward. Strange words coming out of me, given that I don't own him. I sold him back in round 2, was it, when he first got suspended, and I haven't had him back in the team ever since. Although he hasn't punished me too well, but he has, put on a good couple of performances in the past couple of weeks against some easy opponents. But I think, if you looked at the Roosters draw, from looking at Sam Walker's that we just spoke about, there are those tough games in between the State of Origin period against the Panthers and the Storm, but then some easier games. So I think, again, it comes down to also that trade situation. I think if you've managed to be able to save a couple of trades, then I do think an Angus Crichton trade out, if you're able to bring him back in, if you've got a bit of a plan, I think it's valid, given that in those tougher games, I don't know if you will reach those high scores of like a 90, 100 plus, although he can do it in any given week. And also what I've noted here as well is that I'm not quite sure actually what the situation will be in terms of his 2-game suspension, whether that the State of Origin game 1 is going to be included in that 2 games, or if it's only going to be related to club games. Now, I think Angus Crichton is probably going to be a shoe-in for New South Wales, so I think the Roosters can potentially argue that, that State of Origin game, he was going to be selected for it, so can we count that as a 2-week suspension? Because then in that case, he'd be missing round 12, and then he'd be missing round 13, as it was through the State of Origin game, and then he'd be back for round 14. Versus, say, if he was eligible for State of Origin, if he wasn't able to get that State of Origin game counted, he'd be missing round 12, they would buy in round 13, and then he'd miss round 14. So I think some clarity over that might help. I haven't actually been able to follow up on that. Based on the little extract that I've got here, it says that Crichton will also sit out 2 games, including Origin, if he isn't successful, which was the case. So the including Origin, I'm not sure if that means 2 games of club plus Origin, or 2 games where 1 is Origin. I think we need to figure that out. If it's a case where that 1 State of Origin game is included, I think that gives him more justification to hold him, because then he's going to be back in round 14. He's going to be fresh. He's not going to have to be backing up from State of Origin. So you are actually going to be getting 3 games out of him in that little State of Origin period, rounds 14, 15, and 16. He'll miss 17, and then he might get some minutes managed in 18, but then, for the run home, he's all good to go. So I think with the suspension, if it does include that first State of Origin game, I think definitely I would prefer to hold him if you do own him, because I do think he's a season-long keeper, and I think we are getting to that stage of the season where I think it's, you have to start weighing up a little bit more whether you want to be trading in guys and trading them out. Kind of what I spoke about with Matt Burton. I think it really depends on your trade situation. If you do fall into the side of wanting to sell, what are the kind of alternatives to go for? Brandon Smith, who I'll get on just in a little bit, he looks like a great trade-in target for Angus Crichton as well. We had a really good game, scoring 106 last week, and so I think he could definitely be a decent, handy. He'll play in round 13, so he'll be a handy buy playing number, and he can capitalize on that nice Melbourne Storm draw that we just spoke about. We've got Tohu Harris, who's just going to be a set and forget gun. If you're not as concerned about your round 13 numbers and you just want to get someone who's going to be set and forget for the rest of the season, I would say Tohu Harris is probably the number one on that list. I've got him in the team for the past couple of weeks, and he doesn't disappoint. I'm going to make a note as well that next season, from when I first make my team, Tohu Harris is being in my starting second row forward. I'm not going to overthink it. He's just going to be there, and that's it. I've made that decision already. So I think Tohu Harris is obviously going to be a great trade-in target. William Kikau, someone will also mention, he's priced at 402k. He's dirt cheap, and he will play in a round 13 bye week, so it can be a handy number. You can make 200k going from Crichton to William Kikau. I'm not that thrilled about Kikau though. He's gone off the boil a little bit, and I think part of that is also the dominance of Nathan Cleary playing on the right side of the Panthers attack. The left has definitely suffered. We've seen that with Jahrome Hughes' points suffering a little bit, and without tries, Kikau just doesn't hit big scores. Even in games where he scored tries, he still only scored like 55, 58, and he really has to score like a double to get into that 100 plus category, which he was doing at the start of the season. But I just don't like his inconsistency and the reliance on the attacking stats. So for that reason, I would probably personally wouldn't go for Kikau, because I think Kikau in my eyes is not a season keeper as well. So I think if you did a Crichton to Kikau, you would have to be trading out Kikau again. And I think that's a lot of trades to be using on someone like him. And he might only give you like 50 or 60 in that round 13 bye week. So I'm just not quite sure it's worth it. I'd probably just go directly to like a Tohu Harris in my opinion, and just lock him in for the rest of the season. So we've already spoken about Jahrome Hughes, but we will touch on some other of the Melbourne Storm players that we can potentially look to bring into the team. So Nicho Hynes obviously was the hot topic of last week, and he delivered again with a massive 138 last week. He's now got a 3-round average of 139, which is absolutely ridiculous, and he's got a minus 51 break even at 725k, which is just crazy. I think Nicho Hynes is still a very, very good buy. I don't think you've missed the boat on him because of that news on Pappenhausen that he might potentially be out up until round 15 or 16. That gives Nicho Hynes the green light to be the starting fullback for those games against the Broncos, Titans, Warriors, and the Tigers. All 4 games are brilliant for the Melbourne Storm, who are just decimating teams at the moment. So I think Nicho Hynes is still a great trade-in target. If you haven't got on the train already, I'd say get on the Hynes train. He might potentially rise up to like a 900k. At that point in time, you can flip him to like 2 guns, 2 guns in your center wing, or if you've got the right dual plays, you can flip him to like a really gun fullback, which is probably the plan that I'm going to do, is do some kind of tinkering with the team to hopefully flip him to like a Ryan Pappenhausen when he comes back, or maybe a Tom Trbojevic, who I am, having nightmares about at the moment. Hynes could be the stepping stone for me to get to a Tom Trbojevic. So I think Nicho Hynes is a great trade-in target still. And Brandon Smith, who I just mentioned as an potential Angus Crichton replacement, he's 523k, he's got a 25 break even, which you should expect him to reach, and he's shown some good attacking potential. Obviously, we saw against the Raiders he had 3 try assists. I wouldn't expect 3 try assists out of him. I personally think that he's a decent trade-in target, but I don't know if I'd do it myself, because I think he seems to average around 60 to 65, which is fine. But I think he has had those games where he scores around the 40 to 45, but then he has these big upside games that we saw like last week. And I feel like he always tends to hang around more around that 50 to 60 and has less of those high upside games. But then you could make the argument that, well, if he does want to get high upside games, it's going to come in the next month in this draw. So I think overall, I think he's a good trade-in target. He's probably not going to be a season keeper, but potentially you could actually just keep him as like a useful bench 4th or 5th second row forward. He does have the dual flexibility of being listed at hooker as well as second row forward. So I think that actually really does work in his favour, probably something I didn't actually consider enough. So I think Brandon Smith is a great trade-in target. And I think if you have made the decision to sell Crichton, and you've maybe already got like a Tohu Harris, or you're really trying to hammer on that round 13 bye week, I think Brandon Smith is a great trade-in target. So I'll just address some other questions as well that I've kind of seen, a lot of people asking about. So Reece Walsh, whether or not he's a good buy to get in. The Warriors have a great draw after the round 13 bye and post round 14, where they play the Storm against the Knights, the Dragons, and the Sharks. The only downside of that is you're probably going to, by that point in time, you're probably going to miss the boat in terms of his price. And for me, I don't think I would be going there if you've already got like a Teddy Turbo fullback combination. Maybe even like if you had like a Turbo Gutherson or Teddy Gutherson. The way that I see it, Gutherson, potentially might play round 13, although the talk is that, the way that the injuries and suspensions are looking, it looks like Gutherson might even be playing in it might not even be playing in round 13. I still think I wouldn't get on Reece Walsh. He has shown a little bit of inconsistency to begin the season. He has been named to start a fullback, which is obviously a big positive for him. But I just don't see like Tuivasa-Sheck being named on the wing for the rest of the season. So I think there will be cases where Walsh will potentially be named on the bench and come on as a bit of an impact sub instead of being the starting fullback. So that is potentially weighing into my thinking as well. It also depends on the trade scenario. Again, I mentioned, you can potentially do like a Gutherson down to Reece Walsh, make 300, 400k on that trade, ride the price rises and then flip him to a gun fullback again. I think it really depends on your trade scenario. The way that I see it though, I think with the fullback position, I think you've got Turbo, Pappenhausen, Teddy, probably all going to be, higher priorities at fullback, apart from Reece Walsh. Maybe you could argue Gutherson, although Gutherson probably might not have the ceiling that Reece Walsh has. But I think overall, I probably wouldn't be looking to get Reece Walsh unless you maybe have like some people might still have like a Charlie Staines or like a Nico Hines at fullback, and you can flip them to a centre wing and get rid of a centre wing for Reece Walsh. Then I would maybe do that. But if you've got one of those 2 or 3, 4 top line fullbacks, I don't think I'd be looking to get him in, and I don't think it'd be easy to get him in that case as well. Ruben Garrick from the Sea Eagles, yeah, he's done amazingly well. I think he's got a 5 round average of 100 plus, and ever since Turbo has come back, he's been averaging like 90. It's been crazy, and he's getting like goal kick points for fun. I think he's been averaging like 18 points a game in goal kicks. Combine that with his base, he's hitting like 40, 50s for fun. Add in the tries, given that he plays on the wing, and he's been absolutely killing it. He's got a break even of 9 as well, and he's priced at 619k, so he is very expensive. I think the only way I'd be able to get him is if, say, to me it seems like a bit of a luxury trade, given all the injuries and suspensions. If you somehow manage to avoid all that carnage, and you can make an upgrade of, say, like, I don't know, hypothetically, maybe not a Dane Laurie, but if you've got like one of the other cheap centre wings, like still like a Simonson or maybe even a Saab, if you want to maybe flip to a Garrick to get a bit of an upgrade, I would do it. I would probably do that move, but I think you have to really do it now because this is probably going to be the only time when he's affordable. I will note that with the Sea Eagles, their draw from round 14 is really strong. I think they'd only play like 2 like top 8 opponents in the next month and a half, 2 months. It's something crazy like that. The draw is really nice. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. So I think he's definitely going to be a good trade and target down the line as well. Obviously, the Sea Eagles don't play in round 13. And I think you probably have to also consider that, during that state of origin period, if Tom Trbojevic gets a rest, that impacts the whole Manly side. And will he be as good of a player in terms of Supercoach without Tom Trbojevic? That remains to be seen. But I think for the foreseeable future, while Turbo's firing and the Sea Eagles are firing, I think Garrick is a great trade and target as well. In terms of some cheapies, I think Javid Bowen was someone who I mentioned last week as potentially a bit of a risk with Justin O'Neill and Hamasai Tabuai-Fidow coming back to the team. But he seems like he might be getting a bit of an extended stint with Connolly Lemuelu getting a thumb injury. And Justin O'Neill hasn't been named to return, but he's actually the 18th man. And Hamasai Tabuai-Fidow has returned, but he's playing as the other centre wing. So it seems like Javid Bowen for now has got a position in the team. So he has only risen in price just a tad. I think it was like 40 to 50k. But I still don't know if I'd be going there unless you're desperate to really make some funds. Keenan Palacio, I think, is a really great a cheapie to watch in the second row forward. He's playing his second game this round and he scored a 81 in his first game. And at 186k, if we see him get another run of games, say from next week when his first price rise would occur, I think he's a great trade-in target at that point. I would just note though that you've got Jordan Ricky still on his suspension. He should come back into the team next week, as well as an Alex Glenn. I think they're going to be the 2 biggest risks to Palacio and his role in the team. But I think if we see that he's still named to start next week, and then I think he's a great trade and target to capitalize on your second row forward. Potentially if you've got like a Josh Curran still hanging around your team, because obviously he will play in round 13 playing for the Broncos. I think doing a Josh Curran to Palacio move to make up money next week could be a decent shout. I wouldn't advise doing it this week unless you're really desperate to make money, because there is that risk of Alex Glenn and Jordan Ricky coming back soon. So I think if you can avoid it, I would wait until next week to do that move. So the next part of the video, we'll get into the vice captain and captain candidates. I've tried to shorten this list this week, and to be honest, I think it's really straightforward as to who everyone's probably going to go for, but I still wanted to maybe present a couple of other options. Nicho Hynes, I think, is going to be a great vice-captain option coming up against the Broncos, playing at fullback. They've been the worst team in terms of conceding points to fullbacks. We saw Teddy score 97 against them last week in a team that was, in the second half thoroughly outplayed. I don't expect the Storm to roll over to the extent that the Roosters did in the second half. Obviously, the Storm potentially might cop a couple of sin bins and we might see the same thing happen, but I wouldn't put my money on that. And coming off 138, I think Hynes is a fantastic VC option for this round. If you want to go a little bit left field with your vice captain, you can go with a Val Holmes, who's also coming off a big 138, coming up against the Warriors, who have been the third worst team at defending fullbacks. Val Holmes, I think, the game before Origin, he's probably trying to warm up, get his, get a good run of form coming in. And I think with the goal kicking duties as well, the Warriors have shown to leak a lot of points, and the Cowboys' attack has actually shown to be pretty good in the past few weeks. So I think Val Holmes could also be a good VC option, and definitely a pod one if you got him in your team, as I don't think a lot of people will be looking to bring in Holmes with State of Origin around the corner. But if you've already got him in your team and you're vice captain, that could be a great point of difference play for this round. Nathan Cleary, coming up against the Bulldogs, who've been the fifth worst team at defending halfbacks. Don't worry about the stats. He scored 190 last week. He scored 225 the week before. You can vice captain Cleary if you don't want to VC Hynes or Holmes. Otherwise, probably what I'm going to do, just straight captain Cleary. I don't think there's too many arguments about it. I would be heavily surprised if I see his captaincy rate below 45-50% this week. It just looks like a prime game, and the way that's going to go, he's probably going to score like 80-90 points just to rub it in our face for all us who didn't captain him for those really big scores. James Tedesco potentially is a captain option as well against the Raiders, who've been the third worst team at defending fullbacks. Obviously I just mentioned Teddy scored 97 against the Broncos last week, and most of those points all came in just the first half. And we saw Hynes put on 138 against the Raiders last week. Obviously, the Raiders will get some of their players back in terms of Jack Whiten, but given the kind of uncertainty and all the stuff that's happened around the team this week, they may be in for a shellacking, and the Roosters probably want to bounce back as well from last week's loss. So I think Tedesco could be a decent shout, although I will note as well that the loss of Victor Radley definitely might impact the Roosters' attack, so maybe I wouldn't be leaning at Tedesco this week. Dave Fafita coming up against the Sharks, who've been the seventh worst team at defending edge back rowers. I think really the only reason I put him here is that if you've held on to him, he could be the ultimate point of difference player this week to captain him. So many people would have sold him like myself, and I think if you've still got him in the team, even if you don't want to captain him and you still got like a Tom Trbojevic in the team, Fafita could be a good vice captain as well. And again, similar to Holmes, could be a massive point of difference because not many people will have him, and if he does really really well, scores like 150 plus, then I think you could be setting yourself up for success if some of these other guns don't perform as well. And finally, we've got Tom Trbojevic against the Knights, who've been the sixth worst team at defending fullbacks. I don't think I need to speak much more about Turbo. He scored 159 last week. In the 6 games he's come back, he scored 5 centuries, and the one game he didn't was 68 against the Panthers. So I think we can give him some, cut him some slack for scoring only 68 against the Panthers. Tom Trbojevic, if you've got Nathan Cleary, Tom Trbojevic, I think a VC Cleary, Captain Turbo is a very, very safe play. Otherwise, in my opinion, just Captain Cleary, that would be probably the best way to go about it this week. So the last part of the video, we'll just get into the player and team break-evens, and I'll try to use this as well to discuss maybe some potential fringe Origin players who you might want to be kind of wait and seeing on in terms of trading them in, as it definitely seems like there's a lot of debate around the Origin teams. So we've got Keenan Palacia with a minus 39 break-even, who I've just spoken about as well in that Cheapies section. Great trade-in target. If he gets named again next week, I don't think I'd be pulling the trigger this week though. We've got Tom Flegler, who's got a break-even of 26, 334k. I actually brought him in last week, but then I'm a little bit concerned now because I saw Darren Lockyer's predicted Queensland team, and he's got Flegler on the bench. That would really be screwed up my plans, because the main reason I brought him in was to create some money out of selling Takiaho, and to get an extra number in round 13. But if he plays Origin, then I'm screwed. Lockyer does. I think he's on the selection committee for the Queensland team, so I don't think. There is potentially some risk about Flegler, and obviously if I knew that, I might have rethought my decision. But I think if you're not as concerned about that, he still could be a decent shout at that price and that break even, and be maybe a steady, I wouldn't even call him a cash cow, but he might be steady and give you 40 to 50 points a round. On the Bulldogs, the guys who've got negative break-evens are Brandon Wakeham and Nick Kotrick, but overall I'm just still a bit off-put by the Bulldogs in general. They don't play in the round 13 bye week, which is a bit of a shame, so I don't know if I'd be looking at too many of their players. Obviously Luke Thompson is definitely someone to be talking about though. He's got a break-even here, let me just find it here, it is 33. He's got a break-even of 33 and at 541k, definitely looks like he's going to be making a little bit of money. But I think if you haven't yet got in Luke Thompson, if you've got him, great, keep him in there, he's not doing anything wrong for you. If you haven't got him in yet though, I would note that Jack Hetherington and Josh Jackson are back in the team for the Bulldogs this week. So I think it's a perfect wait and see in terms of the impact that they're going to have on his minutes and his potential points production. If it still looks like that them coming back to the team doesn't influence too much in terms of his points, he's a great trade and target from round 14 and 15 in my opinion to cover the round 17 bye week. But I think you can definitely wait and see on him. From the Raiders side, I think probably the guy who's probably maybe got the best investment potential is Corey Harawira-Naera. Got a break even of 11 at price at 407k. He looks like he has locked down an 80-minute role on an edge. So I think he's definitely looking like a more safe trading target, although I still have my concerns over Raiders forwards in general. And given the bit of I don't know if call it a circus, but all the controversies around them for this week and some over the past few weeks as well, it does put me off their players just a little bit. But I think Corey Harawira-Naera is probably going to be the best bet out of that team. And with an 11 break even, he will still make a little bit of money, and he's still relatively okay priced. Maybe if you still want to create some money and do like an Angus Crichton to a CHN, that's not a bad move, I think. Out of the Dragons, I don't think there's going to be too many players who are up for discussion in terms of buying. I will note though that, I think a few people have mentioned potentially getting like a Ben Hunt for Sam Walker. Ben Hunt's got a break even of 57, priced at 460k, so it's relatively affordable. And if you're trading out Sam Walker, you can afford that trade, obviously. And the Dragons run up is really, really nice. They've got a really nice draw coming up in the next month and a half. The only risk with Ben Hunt is if he's going to play Origin. He's a perfect kind of 14th man for them. Playing a bit of a utility role to play maybe a little bit in the halves or play in the hooker position. So I think there definitely is some risk maybe with going with Ben Hunt. Because I do think that potentially is some risk of him playing Origin. So for that reason, I don't know if I'd be looking to trade him in, as he will miss some games as a result of that. And another guy is probably a Jack Bird. He's got a break even of 93, 466k. I just don't think I'm too enthralled by his performances in terms of SuperCoach, so I don't think I'd be going there myself. And Cody Ramsey is probably the only other guy worth noting, but because he had that really low score from last week, he's got a break even of 38, and so he obviously still might meet that, but again, no need to rush him in. I think it's definitely a wait and see. On the Sea Eagles, obviously Ruben Garrick's a big trading target with a break even of 9. I've already spoken about him. Obviously Tom Trbojevic with a break even of 73 with a 946k price tag. He's probably going to crack that and might get close to the $1 million mark and join Nathan Cleary up there. Jason Saab as well with a break even of 47. He looks like he might potentially have peaked in price, although we have seen that in the Manly draw is really, really nice. And I think if he's able to score a couple of tries, he can definitely push that 50 to 60 category. So I think you can make a decision whether you want to cash him out to maybe like a Joseph Suwali, potentially if you're looking to trade down to 173k cheapie in the center wing. You could potentially do that move and create a lot of money. But I think if you've got him at this point, I think it's okay to roll the dice and see if he is able to break that break even of 47. Because I think if he's able to cross over for a couple of tries, he'll probably meet that. And we've got Josh Schuster. He's got a break even of 42 now, so I'm really, really happy that I held him. And he's been named at 5'8", which I think he looks a lot better at in terms of SuperCoach points and also in real life. So I'm really happy to have held him and not done that Tyson Gamble trade. That's definitely looked like it's burnt a lot of people. So I'm really happy to hold Schuster, and I think at this rate he'll probably be a hold until around 17 at least for me. And one last guy we'll talk about from the Sea Eagles is Marty Tapau. He's actually got a really nice average of I think around 63, and he's put in some big scores in the past few weeks. He's able to cross over for a couple of tries, I think, as well as get some try assists. He's got some decent base and also been able to throw a few offloads, so he's got a really decent average of base and power as well. He's got a break even of 53. He is kind of expensive though, 576k. That does put me off buying him a little bit, given that he also doesn't play in round 13. I'd maybe prefer like a Luke Thompson, given that he's 30k cheaper. But again, so I think with both of these guys, I might wait and see. Unless you're okay with your round 13 player numbers and you want to go for a real point of difference in the front row forward, you can go with like a Marty Tapau. On the Storm, I won't talk about these guys too much. Nico Hines is the obvious one here with a minus 51 break even, and Brandon Smith as well with a break even of 25 is a decent shout. There are a few cheap guys here like a Tom Eisenhuth who might do a job. You can bring him in your center wing. He's got a break even of 29 at 310k. With all the injuries that are happening at the Storm, and they will miss some forwards during the State of Origin period, you'd expect, Christian Welch will go to Origin. Maybe Del Finucane might for New South Wales. Felice Kafusi probably should for Queensland as well. So especially Felice Kafusi, that opens up an edge role that Tom Eisenhuth could easily slot into. So I think if you're looking for a real, short-term grab in your centre wing or your second row forward for a really, really cheap price, you could go maybe with a Tom Eisenhuth throughout this origin period. On the night side of things, Sasagi's got a negative break-even of 25, but I don't think he's actually been named in the 17, so I wouldn't consider him. Phoenix Crossland looks like he's now locked up the halfback role, given Blake Green's immediately retired. So I think he's got a break-even of 1, and I think he goal kicks as well. So I think that definitely does work in his favour. Obviously, the Knights have to score points for him to goal kick, but he potentially could be a trade-in target, although I haven't done enough research into him, in all honesty, but he potentially could be a nice point of difference trade-in target, and they will play in round 13 as well. From the Cowboys, I think, again, the main guy I probably would want to target is Val Holmes, but I think with State of Origin around the corner, don't think I'd be looking at getting him in anytime soon. Jarvid Bowen, as mentioned, has got a -10 break even, priced at 232k, so he should still make a couple of nice price rises. And I guess the big one here is also Jason Taumalolo, 115 break even at 576k. Hopefully he goes down in price quite a bit into the 400k range, and he could be a perfect replacement for a Mitch Barnett come round 14 and 15. So let's hope that price goes down once he gets back on the field after his suspension and the bye. From the Eels, I have seen a few people actually buy Jacob Arthur, who's got a -10 break even. He will be playing his third game this week, but Dylan Brown's got 1 more week of suspension, and I'd fully expect Dylan Brown to get back into that Eels side from next week onwards. So I don't think I'd be going for Jacob Arthur at all, and I wouldn't be recommending him as a trade and target. Apart from that, I guess the main people that you want to be considering, like Isaiah Papali'i, he's got a break even of 126, so hopefully he might go down a little bit of price. If you're looking to get him in for round 13, you could potentially wait a week and get him in next week if he goes down a bit in value. Clint Gutherson, it's really a shame that he's got a high break even of 116. He went up to about 790k. In retrospect, maybe I should have gone Gutho to turbo, but he's now 694k. He's probably going to leak a little bit of money, but crossing my fingers that he doesn't get named for New South Wales and can be a handy number in round 13. Ryan Madison as well, I will touch on him. He is also potentially looking like a bit of a fringe origin selection, not orange selection. With all the back row problems now for New South Wales, Cam Murray is only just coming back, so he, might not be fully fit for origin. Angus Crichton is obviously out, Victor Radley is out. So I think there has been some talk potentially that Ryan Madison might get one of the edge roles for New South Wales. So I think if you don't own him, like myself, I definitely would be waiting. The Origin teams should be coming out, I think, Sunday evening or Monday next week. So if you can avoid getting him in this week, his break-even is pretty high as well of 93. I think it's definitely safe to not get in Ryan Madison this week and wait for the confirmed Origin lineups at the end of this round. From the Panthers, I guess the biggest thing here is Nathan Cleary's $1 million and he's got a -41 break-even. So he's probably going to hit the 1.1 million category. There has been some questions about, he's so expensive. Should we trade him out, make a little bit of money on it? I think it's a real ballsy move. And I feel like these kind of things, you try to be a bit cute and it might just go back in your face. I think with Nathan Cleary, just lock him in for the rest of the season and just enjoy the price. Don't look at his price, except obviously now there's $1 million. But, no need to be trading him out, in my opinion, for the money. Matt Burton, as I've spoken about, with a 22 break even, looks like a good purchase for this round. Jahrome Hughes, again, he's kind of one of these fringe origin guys that we have to keep an eye on. 129 break even, he's had a few poor scores in the past couple of weeks. So hopefully, if you don't have him in yet already this week, definitely would be waiting for more news on that come Sunday or Monday on the State of Origin teams. I think the talk is that Jack Whiten is probably in the running to get the number 6 jersey, and that Jahrome Hughes is going to get the number 14 jersey. So it does look like he will play State of Origin, but probably not in the starting 5'8" role, although that's just the talk that I've heard. Obviously, that could be completely different come Sunday. So I think definitely a wait on Jahrome Hughes, as well as a Brian To'o if you don't have him in already. Although I think if you don't have him and he doesn't play State of Origin, get him into your centre wing. He's the best centre wing to go for. Out of the Sharks, I think Matt Moylan's got a -9 break even. So for anyone who still owns him, should hopefully go up a little bit in price, and maybe you can flip him in round 13 for another 5'8" who plays like a Phoenix Crossland potentially. You could do that move. I don't think there's going to be too much more investment though in the Sharks. Jesse Raymond's probably the only guy who I'd note. He's got a break even of 93, so I think he hopefully comes in very, very cheap in the next couple of weeks, because the Sharks draw from round 14 is pretty good. 14 or 15. So I think potentially with like a Jesse Raymond, hopefully he comes down in price for us to pick him up. From the Rabbitohs, I think there's not really too much to talk about in terms of investment of players. Again, like people like your Cam Murrays, Latrell Mitchells, They've got really high break-evens and they might be playing State of Origin, so no need to rush them into your team. And Cody Walker, he's got a break-even of 57. So he's definitely come down like quite a bit in price. If he doesn't play State of Origin and his price is still around that, I think he's a great pickup in round 14 for the run home. On the Rooster side, James Tedesco with a -10 break-even, just keep him in there and hopefully let his price ride for the next few weeks. Although there is some questions to be raised about potentially whether to hold him instead of Origin. I think we'll touch on that maybe from next week onwards. Joseph Suwali obviously had a pretty decent first game up. He's got a break-even of 6, but he's not been named this week, so there's no need to rush him in. Angus Crichton's got a break-even of 18. Something I didn't really mention, that his break-even is quite low. So if you do trade him out, there might be the potential that when you do want to bring him in, he's going up in price. So it's a little bit harder. So that might help in your decision whether to hold or sell him this week. And Sam Walker obviously has got a really high break-even of 125, which is the main reason why probably a lot of people were looking to sell him, as he has probably peaked in price. On the Titan side of things, not too much to speak of. I think Dave Fifita obviously with a big break-even of 152. He very easily could match that though against the Sharks, but hopefully for our non-owner's sake, he comes down a little bit in price and we can pick him up a little bit cheaper post like the State of Origin period. From the Warriors, obviously Reece Walsh stands out there with a -74 break-even. He's going to go up a ton in value, so I think if you are looking to get in Walsh, I think now is probably the best week to be doing it. And on the Tigers side of things, I think obviously a lot of players would be going for these Tigers guys, given that they cover the round 13 bye week. You've got Dewey here with a big break-even of 101, Nofaluma with a big break-even of 89. So potentially these guys might come down in price this week that you can pick up next week, just ahead of the round 13 bye week. I would note though that I don't think I'd be looking to invest too heavily in the Tigers players, because after this week, next week in round 13 they'll versus the Panthers. It will be an understrength Panthers, but the Panthers are the Panthers in my opinion. They're still got a very good team, and the draw for the Tigers for the next month up until the round 17 bye week is really tough. I think they've got the Eels, the Souths, Panthers and Melbourne all in that little period, so I think I wouldn't be going too hard on Tigers players in terms of putting them into your team to cover the round 13 bye week. If you are, probably would be looking maybe more at the forwards, maybe like an Alex Twal. He's got a break even here, let me just find it, 50. And he kind of averages around the 50 mark anyway, so he's probably going to hover around that price, maybe as a Angus Crichton replacement to cover round 13, and to maybe just sit him as like a 5th second row forward, or like a 3rd or 4th front row forward, just to play on matchups and plug in if you've ever got like an injury or suspension. Maybe you could go for something like him, and he's usually relatively safe, 50 to 55, and he won't be too disadvantaged by the tough games coming up for the Tigers. So a quick shout out to our round 11 top scorer in my group league. We've got Jason from Avalon Storm, scored a huge 1,656, absolutely enormous this week. And in our top 5 of our overall group league, we've got James, Jackson, Thomas, James and Sam all sitting inside the top 600, and James is doing really well, sitting overall ranked 45th. I wish I could join you there, buddy, but I'm not doing too well. I'm way down on that list, somewhere in like 30th, with an overall rank of 3,000. If anyone wants to join the group code, it's 286239. Definitely would advise just getting in there. Shout out the top scoring player for each round, and just a bit of fun to see where everyone ranks at the end of the season. So guys, that is the round 12 trade targets and previews. It is a bit of a longer video, but I think there's a lot of discussion points as we're getting close to that State of Origin period and the buy period as well. If there are any kind of specific videos that you guys might want to see around the State of Origin buy stuff, do let me know in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. If you guys enjoyed the video, as always, would really appreciate a thumbs up, and do please consider subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate the support that you guys have shown for the channel so far. But until then, see you guys in the next video.